Hi, this is Victor Vogel. In this segment, we're going to wrap up the last part of our kidnapping series by talking a little bit about controlled and uncontrolled territories in countries you go into, economic status of the country, and give you a little insight about ransom and the impact of money on kidnapping. So, as we go into this segment, I just want to say this will be the end of our presentation or walkthrough of my book, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While Traveling. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it provides you an opportunity to travel safely and more securely wherever you may be going. Don't forget to visit my YouTube channels, Reduce Threats, and also my Facebook, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone. You'll enjoy and see a lot of different videos and a lot of different segments about how to stay safe and how to stay secure wherever you might be. Okay, let's take the next steps and get into the final segment, beginning with controlled and uncontrolled territories in countries you travel. Let's get started. Why would we want to know if a country had uncontrolled areas? As you can see from this map, a large segment of Africa represents high threat and also is known for high kidnapping activity. One reason for this is the governments of Nigeria, Chad, Libya, and Somalia cannot maintain security in much of the territory within their borders. This is due to the different terrorist factions fighting to gain control of the territory from the government and other terrorist groups. Without control of its territories, terrorists and bands of criminals can run rampant throughout much of the country, kidnapping and killing whoever they feel will suit their need. This means anyone going to a country that has warring terrorist groups and gangs of lawless criminals are very susceptible to kidnapping, which is often very violent in these uncontrolled areas. Kidnapping in uncontrolled territories makes it difficult to negotiate a hostage release and may often end in serious injury, longer duration as a hostage, or even death if demands are not met. In countries that have control over their territories, kidnapping is often created on local nationals to gain power to gain release of prisoners the government has detained. We also see more express and virtual kidnappings in countries who have control over their territories. Many kidnappings are for smaller amounts of money in controlled territories and for shorter durations in controlled territories. The potential for long-term hostage-taking is more limited in countries that have control over their territories. These countries have the military and the police power to pursue kidnappers into controlled territory. You can see why you need to know if the area you are traveling to is a controlled or uncontrolled territory within the borders of that country. This will determine the amount of security precautions you need to establish to remain safe and secure while in the country and protect yourself from being a kidnapped victim. Check your State Department app to review the data on the country you're traveling to. One reason I've lumped controlling territory, economic status, and ransom demand together into one video is that these categories are highly integrated with each other. The economic status of a country is often a good place to start determining if that country has a high potential for kidnapping. Countries that are economically distressed, like many countries in Africa, often have corrupt and weak governments and have little control over territories within their borders. Economically distressed countries are breeding grounds for terrorists and criminal gangs. These corrupt governments often will not spend the limited funds they have to protect their people from terrorists or gangs. Consequently, resources are not available for protecting foreign nationals traveling to these countries. In Africa, many missionaries have experienced kidnapping or murder by terrorists and gangs. Most missionary groups do not establish the proper security to protect themselves for whatever reason. They become soft targets for kidnapping or attack, much like the churches in the United States who have suffered lone shooters attacks. We learned from previous video that most kidnappings occur during transit. Many of this third world economically distressed countries do not provide protection for travel routes outside of key cities. In the United States, we're accustomed to law enforcement like the Highway Patrol protecting us while we travel from point to point. This is not the case in most third world countries. In these distressed countries, there are often warring factions of terrorists fighting each other. Leadership changes hands frequently, and it's difficult to identify who has kidnapped a victim. This makes locating the victim and negotiating for their release really difficult. In addition, these lawless and unorganized groups within these depressed countries are extremely violent and ruthless. They will not hesitate to kill another person if their demands are not met and move on to kidnap someone else. These terrorists and gangs have no moral standards. It's easy to see from the threat map where these depressed countries are: Africa, Central America, and the Middle East, as opposed to countries who are economically sound, such as the United States and Canada and Western Europe, China and Australia. You see in these countries little chance of being kidnapped. You should take the time to determine if the country you are going to visit is economically distressed. If it is, you should delve deeper into the country's economy, for example, locations that might have uncontrolled territory or travel warnings. This will help to determine if there is a high potential for kidnapping in this country. It also can provide much more information about your safety and security by examining health issues, potentials for disease, earthquake readiness, hurricane potential, and other factors that also affect your safety and security. You can find this information on your State Department travel app that you can download from the Apple Store. It's even more important to provide the State Department your travel itinerary when you're traveling to economically distressed countries. You should also locate where the embassy is in that country. Pay particular attention to the travel warnings issued for the country in which you will be traveling. Now, to help you understand a little more about Ransom, I've gone to a CNBC website posting on this subject, a multi-billion-dollar business of ransom. A startling 60 to 70% of overseas kidnappings go unreported, which means they do not get reported to the police. They're settled out privately through private insurance companies, etc. So just to give you some impact on what this is about, I'm just going to kind of briefly come down this article level here. You can go to this. You can see in the URL where to go to see this. But for example, here's some statistics relative to kidnapping. I think this is like 2014, which these statistics come a little later to us, so we might get the 2014 and 2016, 2017 time period. Of all the kidnappings that occurred in 2014, 84% were local nationals and 16% were foreigners, which is basically what we've really already covered to some extent. 35% of kidnaps were conducted in Asia, followed by Africa at 30%, the Americas with 21%, the Middle East with 12%, and Europe, Russia with 2%. Nigeria was the number one country for kidnap incidents in 2014, and this basically correlates very well with the concept that we had earlier of third world countries and controlled and uncontrolled environments. So as we look down through this to get a kind of an idea of how much is being paid, they have this really neat little map that you can gloss over. So if we come up into here, into Nigeria, and cover that, the targets were primarily local federal politicians and expatriates, which would be like oil and gas people who come over, or people who come work from foreign governments, etc. The average settlement figure was $100,000, and the average captivity time was 30 days. So that's very much along the lines that we've already discussed. Here are some of the groups that were involved: criminal gangs, Boko Haram, Ansaru, military groups, etc. So as you can see, there's like we mentioned earlier about Africa, there's a tremendous amount of different warring faction groups and gangs in there. We go over here to Mexico, where things are a little more along the lines of cartel activity, and for foreign nationals, the express and virtual kidnapping we talked about earlier in the series. Here it talks about local federal politicians, migrant workers, business people, extra active workers. The settlement price was normally about $200,000. The average time of captivity was 30 days. And most of what we can see here is what I mentioned, and that is that these are criminal gangs or cartels that work in that area. If we come over here into let's say the India area, here targets were local nationals, middle class or wealthy business people, independents. Average settlement was $500,000. Time in captivity, they really don't have data to talk about that. And this was criminal gangs, rebels, opportunity crime. These would be local criminals on the spot kind of activity. If we come up here and to look at Colombia, the average was $350,000 settlement, 270 days, almost a year in captivity. And this was FARC, the ELN, criminal gangs, some probably cartel activity up in that area also. So as you can see, as we go down through this, self-driving cars, the next terrorism threat, there's all kinds of activity that you need to be aware of relative to cartels and gangs and activities, and you can see very much that this is an activity that's associated with many different varieties of kidnapping. And ransoms are varying, but you can see they're heavy ransoms that people are paying. And if there's only a small percentage, or let me put it a different way, if a large percentage of kidnappings go unreported, then we really don't have a good handle on exactly how much is out there. But we can see it's about a $20 million business in the making here for and even into the multi-million-dollar businesses into the making of money from kidnapping. So this is no small thing. If you're a business person and you're traveling, this is not something you want to slide off and say it cannot happen to me, particularly if you're going to those areas that we talked about earlier, these third world countries in here, Mexico, much of South America, just about anywhere outside of the U.S., Canada, Europe, and Australia. And as we go over to the Asian part of it, you can see the Philippines, for example, in their current state are highly susceptible to kidnapping over there too. So that is pretty much a good example of ransom and the kind of ransom that's being paid, and the different kinds of ransoms are averaging about the same. What you'll find in Mexico and other places, and now beginning to pick up in Europe and other places, are the virtual kidnapping and the express kidnappings, where someone will take you in a taxi cab. You'll get in a taxi cab. They'll kidnap you, take you to an ATM, drain your cards, and then kick you out of the car. Sometimes those only account for maybe $500 to $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000 for each incident, but they're becoming highly increasing activity in areas like Mexico and South America, and beginning to pick up in Europe in certain key cities in the area. And the virtual kidnapping, or it is more of an extortion scenario, is beginning also to pick up, and that's also beginning to pick up in the United States. And don't forget to go to my YouTube channel, Reduce Threats, and take a look at the video about fake kidnapping too. So this is all coming about right now. You have to be careful in this world, because people have access to a lot of media and technology they can use. They can use cell phones or Facebook or whatever to conduct a fake kidnapping scenario from just about anywhere in the world to collect from you. So you want to be careful about these issues, and you don't want to slight them. You want to pay special attention if you're traveling, particularly into third world countries. So a little bit about ransom. You can see how it correlates very heavily with what we've already talked about in this kidnapping series, and why my book, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While Traveling, is so important in terms of completing checklists and preparing yourself before you travel nowadays to stay secure and stay protected. Hi, Victor Vogel here again. This is the conclusion of our walkthrough of my book, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While You Travel. A very inexpensive book. You can find it on Amazon.com. A lot of the slides that I showed you, the maps and the information I showed you, plus where you can find my book, will all be down in the description of this particular video as a concluding video in the series. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope it proves helpful to you. The book is very helpful. It's a checklist format. You simply have to go down through the book and fill in information and check off that you've done what you're supposed to do to stay safe and secure. Trust me, today, in this day and time, this is a very valuable tool for you. If you do any traveling, internationally particularly, if you do any traveling, it is well worth the time and effort to be prepared in advance. And it's just not the hostile kidnapping and terrorist activity this book helps you deal with. It helps deal with emergencies, it helps to deal with medical issues, it helps to deal with making it easier while you're traveling, how to make sure if you lose something, you can get it like a passport, you can get it back quicker. Following these rules will facilitate the ease of travel as well as the safety and security of travel. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I look forward to doing more series. My YouTube channel, my Facebook pages, my web page will all be in the description below. You can go to any of these and start following me. Provide me comments about what you would like me to cover in the future. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have, and I'm certainly available via email request to consult with anybody who needs to talk further about their particular situation that they may want to have. So I've enjoyed doing this. Hope it's helpful. Be safe, be secure, and know everywhere I go, I'm going to be creating bad guy free zones. This is Victor Vogel.